part 13 of ADO.NET tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss the use of SqlCommandBuilder class with an example. We'll be using this table TBL students in this demo. Here is the SQL script to create and populate this table with some sample data. I'll have the script available on my blog in case you need it. The first step here is to design a web form that looks like this. To speed things up, I have already implemented the required HTML. So let's copy this and flip over to Visual Studio. So here I have a blank ASP.NET Web Forms application. So let's open up this web form 1.aspx. First, let's set the style attribute of this div tag and set font family to Arial. And then let's paste the HTML that we have copied. Now let's select the entire HTML by pressing Ctrl A and then press Ctrl K and D to format it. And this HTML is very straightforward. So if you look at the user interface here, it has got 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 rows within a table. So here I've got a table where the border is set to 1, and within the table we have the first row here, and notice that within the first row we have got 2 TDs, and within the first TD we have this little text student ID and then a text box control and a button control, and that's what we see in the UI. And within the second TR we have 2 TDs. In the first TD we have this little text name and then a text box control, and that's what we exactly see within the second TR. Very straightforward HTML. And within the third TR we have this little text gender and then a drop down list control, because a drop down list would make more sense to display something like gender. And then this gender drop down list has got 3 list items. Basically the first list item is a prompt to the user to select the gender, and then the second list item is male, third list item is female. And then within the fourth TR we have this little text total marks and then a text box control, and in the final TR we have, look at the TD width there. There's one TD, but the width of that one TD is spanning across the width of the 2 TDs. And to achieve that, we are using call span equals 2 on that one TD. And within this TD, we have got a button control and a label control. We use the label control to display status information, like if we click update button, one row updated. Okay, so we have the required UI, very straightforward HTML. Now basically, when we enter a student ID, for example, here we have entered 1, and then once we click this load button, we want to load that student record from the database table and display that information in the respective controls. Okay, so let's go ahead and double click this button control to generate the click event handler. We're going to write some ADO.NET code here. We need 3 namespaces, so system.data, and we need system.data.SequelClient, and we need system.configuration. And within the web.config file, I have already included a connection string. Look at the name of the connection string, it's a DBCS, and this connection string is pointing to an installation of SQL Server on my local machine. Okay, so let's read this connection string value within the code behind file in the button click event handler. So string connection string equals, we're going to make use of configuration manager class, and we are going to use the connection strings. What is the name of our connection string? DBCS dot connection string should give us the connection string that's there within the web.config file. The next step is to basically create a SQL connection object. And to create a SQL connection object, we need the connection string, so let's pass it to the constructor of that class. Now let's go ahead and create SqlDataAdapter object. Now to create SqlDataAdapter object, I'm going to make use of this constructor, which takes 2 parameters, the select command, that is our select query, and the SQL connection object. So select query is being passed as a string. So first let's prepare our select query. Let's call it SQL query. Now we are going to load one record at a time, so we need to have a where clause. So our query is going to be something like select star from students, so select star from students from TBL students table, where ID equals, and where are we going to get the ID from? We are going to get it from this particular text box on the UI. And if you look at the ID on the web form, it's called txt student ID. So let's copy that and then use the text property of that respective text box. So here we have the SQL query. So now let's pass it to the data adapter object, and the second parameter is the connection object itself. So at this point we have the data adapter object. Now let's go ahead and create a data set object. Let's call it ds equals new data set. And then I'm going to invoke the fill method of the data adapter object. So what is this method going to do? It's going to go to the database using this connection object, execute this query, retrieve the data, and then fill that data within this data set. And when it's going to fill the data within the data set, we can specify a table name within the data set. So let's call that table students. Okay, so at this point we have the respective student record within the data set. Now I'm going to store the SQL query and the data set in a view state variable. In a bit we'll understand why we are doing it. So let's use a view state variable, and let's call the key as SQL_query, and let's store the SQL query. And in a similar fashion, we also want to store the data set. So let's give it a key data set, and what is the data set instance? ds. So let's go ahead and store it. Okay. Now, for example, if I enter student ID 501 and then click load button, we don't have that student record there. So if the student record is not there, then we want to display a status information here. Student with ID 501 is not found. So basically we need to check if a student record exists within the data set. And keep in mind, we are going to retrieve only one record from the database, which means this data set is ever going to have only one record. But now let's go ahead and first check ds.tablesOf. What is the name of the table within the data set? It's called students. So within the data set, find this table and then find the rows, and let's use the count property. So this is going to give us the total number of rows within that table within the data set. If it is greater than 0, then we know we have a student record within the data set, in which case we're going to retrieve that student record values and then populate these controls. If the count is not greater than 0, then what we are going to do, we are going to display information, a message stating student record is not found. So we'll be using this label to display that status information, and the label is called LBL status. So let's set the text to no student record with ID equals whatever ID that we have entered within the text box. Okay. If there is a row within the data set, then what we want to do, we want to retrieve the information from that row. So first we need to retrieve the row itself. So I'm going to copy this. So rows of, I'm going to use the indexer. We know that there's going to be only one row, so get that one row that is present at index 0. And look at this, this is going to return us a data row back. So I'm going to store that in a variable of type data row. Let's call it tr. And now what we need to do, so first we need to display name within the name text box. And how do we get access to the name? Use the column name. dr of name should give us the name value from that data row, and we want to store that in this text box txt student name. In a similar fashion, we want to store total marks as well. So txt, what's the name of the text box there? It's called txt total marks dot text equals, the name of the column is total marks, and then we need gender as well. And gender, we are actually using a drop-down list. So, and the ID of the drop-down list is DDLGender.SelectedValue equals dr of the name of the column is gender. Okay, so at this point we should be able to retrieve the student record and display that on the web form. And one more thing that I want to do, if the student record is not found, I want to set basically the color of the label to red. So for color is going to be system.drawing.color red. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this now. So within this database table, we only have student records from 1 to 10. Let's enter maybe student ID 60, which doesn't exist. Click load. Look at that, no student record with ID equals 60. Okay, on the other hand, if we enter 1, click load. Look at that, that is stored. That's data is retrieved and displayed. And at this point, what happened behind the scenes, we also stored the SQL query that we used in a view state variable and the data set also in the view state variable. Now, once we retrieve the data, we can make the changes to data, and then once I click this update button, we want to update the database table. Okay, so let's double click this update button to generate the click event handler. Now, the first step here is to load the connection string from web.config file, create the SQL connection object. So let's copy that from there and paste it within the update button click event handler. Now, I'm going to create a SqlDataAdapter object once again, because once we click the update button, what should happen? We should update the database table. I'm going to use SqlDataAdapter for that. Okay, so SqlDataAdapter DA equals new SqlDataAdapter. Now, when we create an instance of SqlDataAdapter, we can specify the select command. Now remember, when we were loading the data, this is what is the query that we used to load data, and that query we stored in the view state variable. So let's go ahead and retrieve that select query. Now you may be wondering, we are not selecting data here. Why are we using the select query? We'll understand that in just a bit. Okay, so here the first parameter is going to be the query in a string format, and we are going to retrieve that from the view state variable, and view state is going to return that as an object type, so we need to typecast it to string. And then the second parameter is the connection object, so let's pass that. So now look at this. I am not going to write the update query by hand. I'm going to make the update query auto generate, and to do that I'm going to make use of SqlCommandBuilder class. So what is the use of SqlCommandBuilder class? This class automatically generates insert, update and delete SQL statements based on the select statement for a given single table. Okay, so here we are working with one table, that is TBL students, and we have specified the select query for that table, which is nothing but select star from TBL students, where ID equals whatever ID. Okay, so based on this select statement, the SqlCommandBuilder class is going to generate insert, update and delete statements for us, and let's see how it does that. Okay, so we have SqlDataAdapter object, and that adapter object knows the select query which we have retrieved from the view state. So now I'm going to use SqlCommandBuilder class. Okay, SqlCommandBuilder, let's call it builder equals new SqlCommandBuilder. Now I need to associate this dataAdapter object with the SqlCommandBuilder. Okay, so I'm going to pass that as an argument to the constructor. So look at this, there are two overloaded constructors. I'm going to use this overloaded constructor where we can pass the dataAdapter object. So at this point, the SqlCommandBuilder object knows the select query, because look at this, SqlDataAdapter object knows the select query, and we are passing that SqlDataAdapter object to the SqlCommandBuilder, and SqlCommandBuilder is going to examine that select query, and then based on that it is going to automatically generate insert, update and delete SQL statements for us. Okay, So at this point, SqlCommandBuilder should have generated the insert, update, and delete statements. Okay, so now we can make any changes that we want, and once we click update, we want to persist those changes back to the database table. Okay, now what we are going to do is we first need to retrieve those values and store them within the data set, so that when we say dataAdapter.update, so when we call this update method, basically we can specify the data set object, and within that data set, so basically we don't have the data set yet. Where is the data set present? We have stored that data set within the view state variable, so we need to retrieve that from the view state. Okay, so let's go ahead and retrieve the data set from view state. So let's typecast this to be of data set. Okay, so we want update the table, this table TBL students, from data that is present within the data set. So within this data set, there's another parameter that we can specify, the table name. There's a table called students. So take the data from this table and then update this table. That's what this update does. But then, if we run this code as it is, it's not going to do any update, because when we make changes here, we want to apply those changes to the data set first, and then once we call da.update, that will automatically update it. So first let's go ahead and make the changes to the data set itself. Okay, so first of all, let's check if there are any rows at all within the data set. So ds.tables of, what is the name of the table? Students dot rows dot count. So if the row count is greater than 0, because there should be a row to update within the data set. So when we load the data, what's happening? We load that data into the data set as well, and we stored it in the view state. And now we are retrieving that row from the data set. And then whatever changes we make in the UI, we are going to apply that to the data set. And then once we call the update method, the data adapter is going to use the data that we have changed within the data set and update the underlying database table. Okay, so first of all, if the row count is greater than 0, then we are basically going to say data row dr equals, let's copy this piece of code. Rows of 0 should give us the row within the data set. So now let's apply the changes to the dataset table. So dr of name. So where are we going to get the name from? The student text box, student ID text box. Similarly, we want to update gender. Gender is coming from the drop down list, and the ID of the drop down list is ddl gender, selected value, and we want to update total marks as well, and that is going to come from txt total marks table. Okay, so at this point we have updated the data set. Now if the row count is not greater than 0, then what does that mean? There are no rows present within the data set. In that case, we want to print a message stating lbl status dot, or we'll do that at a later point. Okay, so if the count is greater than 0, then go ahead and update that row that is present at position 0. Okay, and then look at this, we are calling da.update, and look at the return type of this update method. What is it returning back? It's returning an integer back, basically the number of rows that are updated. In our case, it's going to be either 1 or 0. Okay, so let's call it end rows updated equals that, and then if rows updated is greater than 0, then we know for sure a row has been updated, in which case we want to set the fore color of the label to green, and then we want to set the text to how many ever rows updated, and where do we get that number from? This variable rows updated. Let's convert that to string, and then to that string we are going to append this text. Okay, now if it's not greater than 0, then we know that no row is updated, in which case we want to set the color to red, and we want to display this message, no row updated. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this and see if it works as expected. So let's enter, for example, 501. 501 doesn't exist. So when we say load no student record with ID equals 501, now let's try to update this and see what happens. Look at that, no row updated. On the other hand, let's enter a valid record, number 3. Click load. So we have this student record. Let's change the gender of the student from male to female, and let's update that. Look at that, one row updated. And when you look at your underlying table for student record 3, look at that, it didn't update it properly. It basically said name to 3. Let's see why. That's because we're using txt student ID text box value. It's actually student name text box. Okay, so let's run this one more time. Let's enter the student ID 3, so name will be 3 there. Let's simply say John Stenson is the name. Let's update him to male, and let's set his total marks to 1000. Click update, one row updated, and that row should have been updated correctly now. Okay, so it works as expected. So basically, what is SqlCommandBuilder class? This command builder class is used to automatically generate, insert, update, and delete SQL statements based on the select statement for a single table. Okay, so basically here, if you look at this update click event handler, we didn't specify the update statement at all. Okay, so who is generating that update statement for us? The SqlCommandBuilder class. And how is it doing that? Based on the select statement that we specified. Okay, and for the Transact-SQL statements to be auto-generated by the SqlCommandBuilder class, there are basically two steps. Step 1, we create the SqlDataAdapter object and specify the select query. Okay, now here we are doing that in two steps. First, we create the SqlDataAdapter object, and then we are using the select command property basically to create a new SQL command, and then specify our select query. In our example, we have done that in just one line. Okay, so we can do it even in this way. First, create your SqlDataAdapter object, and then use the select command property to specify your select query and the connection object. Basically here we are doing it in one line, but let's do it in two lines. So here I am simply going to say SqlDataAdapter, and then dataAdapter.SelectCommand equals, we need to create a new instance of SqlCommand class, and then specify the command text and the SQL connection object. So where are we going to get the query from? Our view state variable. So view state of SQL_query, and we need to typecast that to string, and then specify the connection object. The application should still work in the same way. Okay, and the next step is to basically associate this data adapter object with SQL Command Builder. Again, you can do that either in 2 lines or you can do it in 1 line, like how we have done it here. Or I can simply say SQL Command Builder and builder.DataAdapter equals DA. Okay, so it should still work in the same way. Let's quickly run this and give a quick test. So let's enter to load. Let's change that to Nicholas 1 male, and let's change that to 790. Click update. Let's select student record 2. Look at that, it's updated as expected. Okay, so basically, this is a very common interview question as well. What is SQL Command Builder class? Okay, so basically SQL Command Builder class automatically generates insert, update, and delete statements based on the select statement for a single table. And for the SQL Command Builder to automatically generate Transact-SQL statements, there are 2 steps. Step 1, create your SqlDataAdapter object and specify your select query. And step 2, associate the SqlDataAdapter object with a Command Builder class. And then on, the Command Builder class is going to auto-generate the insert, update, and delete statements for us. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.